Okay, so we're going to discuss 1 Kings 18 tonight in our continued look at Elijah, but we are also going to do a quick review of 1 Kings 17 to bring us up to where we are tonight. So we sort of looked at 1 Kings. There were 3 events. I guess if we were going to call them something, we could look and see. Does somebody want to tell us? And if we could do these in order, that would be good. So what was the first thing that happened in Elijah's life according to 1 Kings 17?
It was sent to Ahab. Oh, according to 1 Kings 17.
Sure. Yeah. 17. To do what?
Yeah, to tell him there's not going to be rain for a long time.
Okay. And so then that led to the next 3 series of things that we see happening. What's the first thing that God did after Elijah gave this message to King Ahab?
He went to live by the brook in Cherith,
Okay.
and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and at night.
Okay. And how did that happen?
God told him to go.
Yep. What did God say he would do?
Hide yourself by the brook, and you will drink by the brook, and God will command the ravens to provide for you there.
To provide. So God was going to provide for him. Okay. So then the word he gave to the king was that there wasn't going to be rain. Did we see evidence of that happening? Yes.
Yes, the brook dried up.
The brook dried up. So did God just leave him there without water? What happened next?
Told him to go to the widow.
Okay, he told him to go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I have a sticky note on it where it says, arise and go to Zarephath.
Okay.
Belongs to Sidon, where the widow is going to be. And he came to the gate of the city, and there was a widow there, and she gave him, he asked for water, and he even asked for bread before she fed herself and her son. He said, feed me first.
Mm-hmm.
And he did that. I mean, she did that.
Okay. What had God told Elijah that would happen there when he went to this city with this widow?
I think he told him that the bowl of flour would not even be exhausted. He knew that.
Mhm.
Or he
Okay.
asked him.
Okay.
The widow would provide.
Okay. Go ahead, Cheryl.
That God commanded a widow there would provide for Elijah.
Okay, good. So yes, you see, I'm drawing out a few things that are kind of repeated. So God commanded the ravens to provide. God commanded a widow to provide. And what was the widow's situation as Elijah was asking her for this water, and then, which was no problem at the time apparently for her, but then the bread? What was her situation?
The last of it.
Yep. How do we know that? What was the depth of the situation?
It was a famine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
She said
How-
she was going to make a small loaf for herself and her son, and they were going to die after
They
that.
were going to die. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the case. And then somebody's already told us, God said, do this, and then you won't run out of these supplies. And so did that happen? Did God keep the supply going?
Yes.
Yes. But then what happened? This is where we will start 17. It's the last event, kind of wraps this up. Somebody besides Mary and Dee Dee. You guys are fine. I'm just going to make other
I
people
know.
talk.
That's good.
The woman's son got sick, and it was sick to death. So he died. And then the woman was saying, why have you brought this on me? And then even Elijah cried out to God and said, why have you brought this? And then he stretched himself out on the child 3 times and called out to the Lord and prayed, and then the child revived.
Okay, and what was the response then of the woman after this happened, after Elijah brought life back to her son?
That now she knows that he is a man of God and that the word of the Lord in his mouth is truth.
Okay, good. That's a great phrase to remember. It'll become part of what we talk about tonight. So just as one more part of our review, we talked about this a bit. What do you think were God's purposes in the things that happened in chapter 17?
For us to look to him as his provider.
Okay, he showed that he would do that. Good, that would be one. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Anybody
Proving
can
his-
talk again now.
Proving his word is true, because the ravens will provide for you. And I'm thinking ravens were unclean birds and all that, so it's kind of weird that that would happen, but it did. So it's true. And it didn't rain because God said until Elijah announces it's gonna rain, it's not gonna rain.
Mhm. Okay, good.
And he could have been strengthening Elijah's belief in him by testing to see what he would do.
Okay, good. So we see growth in faith, provision, the proof of God's word. Those
And
are things.
Elijah, and
Go ahead,
Oh.
Cheryl.
he was obedient to God too, that none of these would have happened if he wasn't obeying God's.
Right.
True. Yep. We looked at this extraordinary obedience that he had, that every time God told him and he went and he did it. God told him and he went and he did it. And even if you look, when he told the widow what the Lord said, what did the widow do? Was she obedient?
Yes.
Yes, would continue to watch for this pattern or this picture to see if we see this kind of obedience in the people that God continues to bring into Elijah's life and faith journey. Anything else anybody wants to bring up from 17, or we'll start reading chapter 18?
I think it shows, it's demonstrative that God is clearly telling everybody, whether they believe or not, he's in control of everything. So those who trust in him, the provision will be made, but also those who do not trust in him, he's still in control. So all they're doing is denying themselves his provision.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I see that as I look, we have to remember who did it, okay? Moses didn't do it, and Elijah didn't do it. He was part of the plan, but God did it, so.
That's right.
God
God
did
had a
it.
plan, and that's why it was important for us to bring out that God commanded the ravens, God commanded the widow, so
Yeah.
that we see and we watch and see if Elijah sees that he's not doing it, but God is doing it. So great points, great things to keep in mind as we continue this same story as we go into chapter 18. Now, there's a lot more little segments, but we're going to read and discuss them in some bigger segments. So this week, I'm going to start at the bottom because I usually kind of end up with the same people in a row. I think it must put you in order of, no, that's not true. Never mind. Okay, so Stephanie, can you read verses 1 to 16? And actually what we're going to do, because of time and because of how long it is, we're just going to read the segment we're going to discuss. We're not going to read the whole chapter at once and come back and read again. We're just going to read it step by step through the progression of the story. So as Stephanie reads verses 1 through 16, if you are just kind of doing observation along with us. Did you guys hear the echo? Okay, that's not good.
Is it me? I just unmuted in preparation to read.
I don't know. Try turning off, Stephanie. Let me see. Ah, it is you. So I guess for now, I'm not going to have Stephanie read. We'll see if that gets fixed when she tries to talk to us later. Oh man, how does one person do that? I don't understand the tech. I really don't. Evelyn, are you able to read tonight?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so Evelyn's going to read verses 1 through 16 for us. And if you're just starting your observation along with us, just look for the Lord, kind of watch Elijah. And as we always talk about, we look for the who, we look for the people the first time through things. So you can kind of look for the new characters that are brought in to this chapter. Just kind of keep your mind on them, or maybe kind of note them on in the margin. In fact, you could write their names off in the margin. It'll help you find them later. Okay, Evelyn, verses 1 to 16.
Now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go present yourself to Ahab, and I will provide rain on the face of the earth. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water. Then Ahab said to Obadiah, Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the river valleys. Perhaps we'll find grass and keep the horses and mules alive and not have to kill some of the cattle. So they divided the land between them to survey it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. Now, as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he recognized him, and he fell on his face and said, Is it you, Elijah, my master? And he said to him, It is. Go, say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. But he said, What sin have I committed that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to put me to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom to which my master has not sent word to search for you. And whenever they say he is not here, he makes the kingdom or nation swear that they could not find you. Yet now you are saying, Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. And it will come about when I leave you that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you to where I do not know. So when I come and inform Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me, though I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been reported to my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, that I hid 100 prophets of the Lord by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water? Yet now you are saying, Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. He will then kill me. Then Elijah said, As surely as the Lord of armies lives, before whom I stand, I will certainly present myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and informed him. Then Ahab went to meet Elijah.
Okay, so we have some connections to the last chapter and then a continuation. Again, great thing about reading a lot of the Old Testament is that you pick it up, it's just a story. It's a real story, but it just reads like a novel, right? You can just read it and follow along with these characters. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to try to take it that way as we talk about it tonight. So as we look at the beginning of the chapter, the first thing that we get is a time frame. So it's a continuation where we left off, but what's the time frame that we get in verse 1?
Many days.
In the 3rd year.
In the 3rd year. Yeah, the 3rd year of what? Somebody said it. Did you say it, Deanna?
No, but is it King Ahab's reign or the 3rd year of the drought?
The 3rd year of the drought, right? So in the 3rd year of the drought. And then if we were to continue, in fact, into the next, what then has been the impact on the land there, as you might expect?
Famine was very severe.
Okay, so the famine was severe. So in the third year, then what happened? What do we see Elijah doing in, or the Lord and Elijah? What do you see happening in verse 1 in that third year of the drought?
They're
He was-
going to provide rain.
Yes, but what's the direction? Who's talking? Let me put it that
Oh.
way.
The Lord is sending Elijah to Ahab, and the Lord is gonna bring rain.
Okay, and so Elijah is going to Ahab to do what? You've said both parts. I just want to make sure that we
Oh,
say
to
that.
tell him the Lord is going to now bring rain.
Yes,
Is that
thank
what you're
you.
looking for?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
you had it all. I just wanted to connect them. So that's his instruction. So as we've been watching what Elijah's actions are after the Lord tells him something, what do we see here? What happens? What does Elijah do?
He's running and hiding.
Uh,
Oh, no, he went to present himself. He
yes.
went to,
So yes, verse 2, he went to present himself. So the Lord told him and he went. Okay, so then this is sort of the meanwhile, like, and this is something sometimes in these passages, if you're trying to track what's going on and it sort of changes setting or changes subjects, you could kind of even put in your margin, meanwhile, back in Samaria, and it'll help you sort of track, because we changed completely here. We get this introduction in verse 1, and then we're looking at a completely different scene and setting. And we're in Samaria. Well, we think we're in Samaria. The famine was severe in Samaria. That's the capital of Israel. So I'm assuming, I'm guessing, I'm reasoning that we might be in Samaria. But who are we dealing with? Who do we see speaking now?
Obadiah.
Well, who speaks first? Who does what? Who's the
Ahab.
main? Ahab. Yeah, Ahab summons Obadiah. And then what do we learn about Obadiah? We learn a few things. He's new to us here. So what do we learn about him?
he was in charge of the household.
Okay, so he's got a lot of responsibility if they're talking about the king's household, right? Okay,
Mhm.
good. What
And
else
he
do we? Yep, go ahead,
feared
Jocelyn.
the Lo- He feared the Lord.
Okay, it says he feared the Lord, and then it tells us how we know that. They gave us the example of his behavior. What did he do that indicates that he feared the Lord?
He hid 100 prophets when Jezebel was out trying to kill him.
Okay, good. How did he do that?
Now you're asking me some stuff from memory. I think he took him in and put him in a cave, and he gave him food and water to
Yep.
sustain.
Yep, he took them. There's 100 of them. That's a lot. Did he take them all at once?
Looks like 50 in each.
Yep, he took 2 groups of 50, provided them with bread and water. So even though this famine is severe, what do we know? In a couple spots, we've seen it now. Somebody brought it up last week and we see it here.
God's providing for what they need.
Yeah, there is still some access to bread and water. Now you would imagine, of course, the king is going to have it. So Obadiah would have access. So not everyone has completely run out of food. And what happens is, we saw the widow was already in a bad situation. What do we see happen when these events happen in the world? Who's going to suffer first?
The
Widows,
poor.
orphan.
The widows, the children, the poorest of the poor are going to suffer long before it ever reaches up to the king's level. And also we would know the priests in Israel would have stores of food and water. So there is some available, and you can just reason that by the fact that he had it. Okay, so that's Ahab calls him. Then we learn something about him. What does Ahab want Obadiah for? Why does he get him brought in?
to go see if he can find water in any of the springs in the land or some grass so that they can keep their horses and mules alive.
Okay, so how is this gonna happen? How is this looking for water or grass gonna happen?
They're gonna go out.
Yeah, I just want to clarify who's doing what, like what the direction was, Tracy.
Oh,
Just for-
okay. Yeah, Ahab went one direction and Obadiah went another direction. So they both went out to search for water.
Okay, so
Correct.
interesting. Ahab's going as well, but they divide up the land and they're going, which sets the stage perfectly for what happens next, right? When we get into our next segment, we see Obadiah is on his way. And what happens?
Elijah shows up.
Elijah shows up. Elijah meets him. And what do we learn about this meeting of Obadiah and Elijah? What do we know now?
Obadiah recognized him and
Okay,
bowed down to the ground and said, "Is it really you, my Lord, Elijah?"
yeah, so he knew him. He knew him by sight. He knew who he was. So again, this time we don't see God saying he was providing, but again, we see an action of a king, but that God, you think God directed that? Did God direct Obadiah's steps and Elijah's steps? Yeah,
Yes.
we don't always stop and think about that, but we see that here. So what does Elijah say to Obadiah? What does he want him to do?
Wants him to go to Ahab and tell him that Elijah is here.
Yeah, that seems simple enough, right? Like, Elijah went to the king without any trouble before. How's Obadiah feel about doing that?
Mhm. He's afraid.
He's afraid, and he describes why, and he describes it over several verses, and it's pretty easy to summarize. What's he saying? What do we learn here?
If I say you're here and Ahab doesn't see you, then he'll put me to death.
Okay,
Afraid that the spirit of the Lord would take Elijah off somewhere after he told Ahab that he was there.
okay, so we'll talk about that part in a second. So why does he think that Ahab would be mad at him or would kill him if Elijah, we see a pretty strong picture here of what this has been like while Elijah has been in the places where God sent him. And it connects us back to chapter 17. What do you see here that's been going on?
Ahab's been searching for him.
Yeah, how much, how far, how wide?
In all the nations and kingdoms. And when he got there and they said he wasn't here, he made them swear that he wasn't there, that they couldn't find him.
Okay, so not just in Israel, but in all the kingdoms, and there's no nation or kingdom which he has not sent for word for you. And then he made them swear. Now think back to the first word that we see God giving Elijah in chapter 17, when he sent him to the brook. What did he tell him to do at the brook?
So
Hide himself. And we talked about, well, that must be because of, that people, maybe the king or people, would not be happy with him. Would we see the evidence of that here? Yes. So we see this connection between God, not just providing for him, but protecting him by sending him to that brook. So we know the king has been looking. Let's talk now about what Tracy tells us. He's sort of laying out this conversation he would expect to happen. So Obadiah says, I'm going to go tell the king that you're here. And then while I tell him, the spirit of the Lord will carry you away where I don't know. And why would Obadiah think that? And what do you think about that picture here? It's kind of interesting, especially if you've known the story or read all of our forecasting into the future. First of all, what do you think about the fact that he thought that would happen?
it probably happened before with others.
Maybe,
And-
right?
Yeah, and maybe because Elijah was not boldly walking out in public. That would give me the impression that he was, I wouldn't say sneaking places, but he was being very discreet with his appearances.
Okay,
I would guess because he's successfully hidden from the king for 3 years, Obadiah is thinking that God is keeping him hidden. So he's afraid God will hide him again.
okay. What do you think about the way he says that? What do you think about the phrase, the Spirit of the Lord, which we don't always associate with the Old Testament, first of all, will carry you to where I do not know? Any thoughts on that?
Well, there are scriptures that say the Spirit was on him, and then he, like at the end of this chapter, he outran Ahab. And then when Elisha is waiting for him to, he said, give me a double portion of your power. And he said, well, if you see me go. And so the Spirit took him up and Elisha saw him. So
Okay, so
it's just
spoiler
been-
alert, if you haven't finished all the reading, if you're in class or watching or don't know the story, in a way, it's like foreshadow of what will happen. And if you're a person who's looking for precedent in the Bible of times when God has supernaturally removed his own people from the face of the earth, would this be one of those times? Yes, it would be one of those occasions. So that's a place, if you're looking for those for a particular list you might be keeping, this sounds like that, and then we'll watch for it later. The Spirit we see here, Holy Spirit. So there were times in the Old Testament when the Holy Spirit is referred to. They knew the Lord had a spirit and that he acted, right? He interacted with them. So he's worried about that. And then Obadiah wants to make sure that Elijah knows, what he's been doing. So what does he tell him about in case he hasn't heard it?
Is that
And he hid the prophets.
Fear the Lord from his youth? Wait, is that what you were
Okay,
saying?
he says, I feared him from my youth. And then Dee Dee, what did you say?
That he hid the prophets from Jezebel.
Yeah, so he's telling him that, well, you've been gone for 3 years. Don't you know I did this? Don't you know I fear the Lord? Why do you want to send me to the king and do this? And then you're going to be gone and he's going to kill me. So he's trying to say, hey, this is real. If I go tell him and you're not there, he's going to kill me. And I'm trying to serve the Lord. Do you feel like that's a legitimate concern that he has? Yeah, he's served this king. He's been in this household. He knows Jezebel as well. He was working to protect God's prophets. So he has reason to say, I know what will happen if he can't find you. But when Elijah speaks back to him, what does he say? He might start recognizing a certain phrase that Elijah uses.
That as the Lord of hosts lives before whom I stand,
Yeah.
surely I will show myself to him today.
Yeah. So has he said that before? As before the Lord I stand?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's always telling us and reminding us that God is his witness, right? This is like saying, I stand before the Lord as God is my witness. This is like giving an oath that I'm doing this before God. He knows it. I'm doing it in his word. Sometimes we'll see if he says that. He says, I will present myself to him. So what does Obadiah do?
He went to meet Ahab and tell him that Elijah is there.
Yeah. And what's Ahab do?
He went to meet Elijah.
He went to meet Elijah. Now, this is a point I want you to watch as we go through this chapter. Who's Ahab?
Wicked king.
Wicked king of where?
Israel.
Israel. And a prophet just told him that Elijah said, come see me. And he goes to see him. Anybody think anything about that?
Hmm.
What would you do if you were king of Israel and Elijah wanted to see you?
I go see him, especially when he told me it wasn't gonna rain. and then it
Okay,
did rain.
you would go see him?
No, you could expect him to come to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think we would. I think we'd say, I don't think so. I'm the king of Israel. You come here and
Yeah.
see me.
Yeah,
Watch
but
this. Go ahead, Jocelyn.
by him being a prophet of God, and by him saying it wouldn't rain, I'm getting on my horse and going figuring out who is this guy. And
Okay, well, that's another perspective. It's interesting to me that the king just goes, but watch and see.
That was weird.
Yeah, do you think that in one sense, Ahab really cares much what the prophets of God say, and how would we know that?
Because of
Like
what his
Jezebel.
wife does.
His wife has killed hundreds of them. So it doesn't seem he has a high regard for the prophets of the Lord. But
Yes.
he could have a definite curiosity about Elijah. I still think, even based on Bible stories, that it's interesting that he just goes instead of saying, I'm the king, I live in the palace, you come see me. But anyway,
I
Make you wonder though, if he went by himself or if he took his army with him, because, he's probably very, very mad at Elijah because of the no rain thing.
and that's just the thing. We don't know exactly what happened. But again, looking at the fear that Obadiah had to even go give him the news, and the fact that Ahab just goes, it just seems a little interesting. So I feel like we see God's hand at work here. It's just one of the things I'm thinking. Or one of the things we might want to think about, what kind of persuasiveness does Elijah seem to have over people? Do you think he has persuasive powers?
Yes.
Yeah, he does with Obadiah, right? How about in chapter 17? Was he persuasive with the widow? Yeah, he has the ability to speak and people act. So we want to think about, by the end, when we're kind of tying it up, why? Why is that? What would Elijah have that would give him that ability for the Lord, right? We would say this for the Lord. And the reason we want to think about it is because, is that something that we want to have?
Yeah.
Do you want to just say things to people and they do it? In general, I think we do, but also for the Lord, right? He's doing these things for the Lord, and he has some ability to be able to do it. So we want to talk about that as we watch it continue. Okay, so any other thoughts, questions, insights before we head into the next section where we hear more of the story?
Well, I thought it was interesting in chapter 17, where the Lord arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. And in chapter 16, that's where Jezebel is from.
Okay.
Is
Good.
from Sidon. So
Yeah.
I feel like, if the king searched everywhere and then they had to swear that he wasn't there, again, I think God protected and hid him
Yeah.
and protected the widow. He probably could have got killed.
Yes, if anybody had found anywhere where he was, that's interesting too. Now, knowing the king has searched everywhere, including where he had been, which wasn't in this same area, that's interesting that he wasn't found. I'm going to let you guys read. I'm going to pop off because I thought I had a full battery, but I don't. So if, oh, you all moved. Laura, can you read? Would you read 17 to 24? And I'll be right back with you guys. You go ahead and read, even though I'm going to pop off for a minute.
When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed Baals." Thank you. Now, summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 450 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us, let them choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God." Then all the people said, "What you say is good."
Okay. Yeah, so here we get into like this really, really interesting part of this story. One of the scenes that's probably most known when people think about Elijah. As we look at him getting ready to speak, I want to go back for 1 second to something we want to think about as Elijah speaks to people, and we see he has this persuasiveness. What was it? Somebody said it, like somebody remembered it. The very last words of chapter 17, what was it that the widow said about Elijah after he brought her son to life?
Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth, is in your truth. The word of the Lord in your mouth is truth.
Okay, and we think about Elijah going to speak in front of kings and in front of others. And if somebody would, whoever finds this first, would you look at Mark 13:11 for us? Now, this was words in a different situation. In fact, the first part of the situation won't relate, but if somebody would read Mark 13:11, this might be something we want to think about Elijah. It would relate maybe to what we're looking at for him.
I have it.
Okay, Laura.
Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given to you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit.
Okay, this is a different situation. Obviously, Elijah going before kings and other people. But is this something based on what we've seen about him? In fact, how he's described in Luke, right? That John the Baptist would go in the spirit and power of Elijah, something we've been looking at for ourselves. Do you think that that's what's happening when he speaks? Is that where the persuasiveness might be coming from? Yes. Yeah, we're going to want to think about that as we get ready to sort of take our impact for ourselves in our ability to do those things. So as Laura read, now we are getting to this meeting between Ahab and Elijah. So Ahab sees him, and what is his greeting? What does he say to Elijah? Some of you have different expressions probably, which are interesting to read all together.
Calls him the cause of disaster of Israel.
Yeah. Is this you, the cause of disaster? When Laura read one of the other versions, she had a different word. What did she have? Some of you probably have that one.
Troubler.
Are you the troubler of Israel? Is anybody curious or already looked to see what that means, really, to be the troubler or the cause of disaster for Israel? If you look it up, it's the word akar, A-K-A-R. It means to stir up or disturb or trouble. But if you continue to look, it says to roil water, not boil, but it's the same idea, right? To make water boil, right? To get it stirred up and going. What do you need to have to make water boil? Heat, fire. So do you think if you were to think about the prophets and think about Elijah, do you think they bring the heat? Do you suppose in some ways he has done that? Yes, right? They, unfortunately, if we look at their lives, they are frequently asked to bring the fire of the Lord, right? To bring the heat, to put the pressure on. But what does he say back to Ahab? Does he speak cowardly or boldly? Boldly, what does he say?
Puts it back on him.
Yeah, he says it's you, and then he gives the reason. And this reason is really important. There's one of our because statements, right? One of our conclusions. What does he say is the reason that in truth, it's Ahab who's brought the stirring or the boiling or the heat and the fire to Israel? How has he done that?
Ahab
You have
had abandoned the commandments of the Lord.
Commandments of the Lord.
All the balls.
Yes, the Baals, right? You have abandoned the commandments of the Lord. Not only that, then you have instead followed the Baals. Now, did we see the setup for this when we talked about the background of First Kings 1-16? Yes, king after king after king brought them in. If you were to do any kind of looking at this, you would find that during the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, Israel hit its height of worship of the Baals and Asherah and all of those people. It was the worst in history at that time, the time that they're living in. Why is this so bad? Do you know anything about this picture? What makes this such a bad thing that they worshiped these other gods? What do you know about the gods, or what do you just think in general?
Were
I
the
would-
Baals one of them that they sacrificed their children to in the fire?
Yeah, so one of them was that was one of the things that they were done because he was seen as one of the gods of fertility or creation, fruitfulness for crops, right? Think of all the things they looked to these other gods for. Did they need to do that? Did they already have somebody who was the creator of crops and land and themselves, babies and children and fertility? Yes. And who is he speaking to here? Are these foreigners?
No,
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 who are they?
They're Israelites. They're the
They're
Jews.
Israelites. These are
They're the
God's
tribes.
people, right? We have to remember that. We're not looking at a foreign nation here. We're looking at God's people. These are the people of Israel who he's calling out for doing this. And also the other thing involved in all of these idol worship was sexuality and cult prostitution. So again, just sort of adding all of that to it. So if you think biblically, if you're not worshiping God and you're worshiping anything else, ultimately, who are you worshiping? Satan. And actually the New Testament tells us that. In 1 Corinthians 10:20, would somebody look that up and read that one for us? This is Paul speaking as he approaches the people in Athens and sees there, remember the grave to an unknown God, or the statue to an unknown God. They even worshiped something they didn't even know. This was Paul's word to them.
10:20.
Yeah.
I got it.
Okay.
No, but I say things which the Gentiles sacrifice. They sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to be partners with demons.
Okay. So anything that we put before God, anything anyone worships that is not God is demon worship, right? That's just something, that's a New Testament statement that we want to remember. And there's a place even where, Jesus was talking about a similar thing. So, and also the other part then, so this is what they're doing there, but the other part of you have abandoned the commandments, right? So they walk away from God and then they try to replace him with other gods anyway.
I had a question, Chris. Do you
Yeah.
know in the context of this, do you know, did they accept the God of the Israelites as just like another God, just not the only true God? And so they were just kind of doing whatever was convenient. I thought that was really interesting because here you come across this kind of moral exemption, right? So if I accept all the gods, something's going to work out in my favor, like, you know, the more the merrier type thing, you know. I'm going to be luckier because I have all the gods here. And so I thought that was so interesting because Elijah's pointing out numbers, right? You have 450 in your favor, and I'm just one, kind of pointing out, like, in a certain way, look how many gods you have, like how many whatever parts of Baal or worship or whatever you do, there's just myriads of them, and I only have one, kind of pointing out, does it really matter as long as one is the true one? You know, this is it. The other ones are irrelevant. I don't know.
Well, there are a
Anyway.
lot of prophets. I do just want to, I think that's an interesting point. But again, we're talking about God's people who one of the things that they have always said is the Lord is one, our God, he's our God. Like that is their history. So, and they've been told from the beginning not to worship other gods. But I do want to clear up, even though they do have hundreds of gods, probably here in our context, he's not saying there's 450 gods. He's saying there are 450 what? Prophets of Baal, and then there's 400 more of Asherah, and who are they connected to?
Great gods.
Where would you find them?
Jezebel's table.
At Jezebel's table. Elijah said, you can go get them.
Yeah.
They're eating at Jezebel's table. So, and Asherah was the female counterpart with all the same kind of worship. So this is where we are. This is the situation that Elijah is walking into. Think of that. 450 for Baal, prophets of Baal, 400 more for Asherah. We don't even know how many they had for all the other. Every god would have had prophets and temples, or at least groves or places where they met. And now this is what Elijah faces. So we see him saying, I'm not the troubler. You've brought the disaster because you've gone and worshiped these other gods. We knew that was the situation, as we discussed last time, that God was going to do something about this very fact. And so now we see again Elijah speaking still to Ahab, and he tells him what to do in preparation for the next thing. What is it that he tells Ahab? We basically just said it, but it's the connection to these prophets. What does he tell him to do? Just the first part, just like verse 19.
To send orders and gather unto him all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah.
Okay, so gather all the people, gather all the prophets, and meet at Mount Carmel. Now, what did Ahab do when Elijah told him to do this? He did it, right? Again, I guess some of you aren't as impressed, but I just kind of thought, wow, talking about the spirit and power of Elijah, he speaks to this king. And again, this is a place where he may have been curious to go meet him before, but certainly he doesn't have to. Many kings spoke to many prophets in the Old Testament, and they did not do what they asked them to do. In fact, they did the exact opposite. But here we see Ahab doing so far whatever
I
Ahab
see
tells him.
Ahab as a man's man anyway. I kind of thought he was kind of a weak person.
Okay, maybe because of his wife, huh?
Exactly my opinion too. Jezebel runs the house.
Yeah, clearly, yes. Okay, so Ahab goes and gathers the people at Mount Carmel, and what does he say and how does he do it? I think this is interesting. what does it say Elijah does?
He talks to the people.
He talks to them in what kind of proximity, do you think?
Well, it says he approached all the people.
Yeah, he approached them. To me, he's coming
That's
close,
close.
right?
Yeah,
He's
that's
close. He's not standing on the top of the mountain far away with a bullhorn acting like he's something or like he needs to be big, right? Keep this in
No.
mind. He comes to them. This verse
Sure.
is so important, right? What's the question he asks them? It's sort of a question and a statement together. I was going to
Yeah.
put this as the title of my video this week, but I took it back because I had another one I like too.
How long are you going to struggle with these two choices?
Yeah.
And
What two
well,
choices?
somebody else, I'm too.
No, go ahead,
talky.
Mary. What two choices?
If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him.
Do you think
And-
this is a question we could be looking at today?
Yes, yes.
Yes, right? Right?
I was gonna
This is
say, it's
what we
when you
need to
ask your
say,
kids, you
right?
know?
Your kids or people
Yeah.
struggling because they think they don't know what the will of God is. They look at a
Right.
situation and go, oh, I'm not sure what to do. And you just kind of want to go, really? You don't? You're not sure which side God's on? Let's ask yourselves questions. Let's see. Is the situation bringing confusion and chaos? Is God part of that? Nope, he's not on that side. That's a pretty simple one right now. That's a really simple one to know. Is he bringing confusion? Is it bringing confusion and chaos? If it is, it's not God, right? We know that he's a God of order. So this is the question of the day. It's our question for the day. Why are you struggling? Did anybody look that up? I know we're not really all doing homework before. If you look at this word, some of the versions say falter. If you look at one of them, it says limping. It's literally causes you to stumble and limp. You're limping along because you don't know who to follow. What a
Yeah.
picture. Is that the picture that we want for our lives? To be limping along while we try to figure out who's God and who's not God? Who do we follow that's godly? Who do we not? This is the question he asked them. He sets the stage with this question, and he's about to show them the difference, right? He says, if God is God, follow him. He's about to show them who God is. And I'm sure that this will set them up for life forever, right? They'll never wander again, right? After this. Yeah. Okay, so he tells them the plan. When he approaches them, he says, okay, this is what's going to happen. How does he start off? What does he remind them? Again, you have the 450. How many does he have, the prophets?
Himself.
Just him, which first of all, I don't even know how to discuss that. Like, wow, is he really, he's the prophet to Israel. Yeah, and they have 450 just to one God. So he tells them, so again, showing I'm nothing, I'm just one, you've got 450. So here's the test. What's the test to see who's the real God? Somebody tell us the plan.
So they'll prepare an ox, he'll prepare one and they'll prepare one, and put the wood under it and get it all ready, but they're not going to set fire to it yet. And then they'll call on the name of their God, and the God that brings down fire on the offering is the Lord.
Okay. And how did the people respond? What did they think?
They thought it was a good idea.
They thought it was a good idea. Now, we could kind of go two ways with that. Well, because they're God's people, maybe they are actually expecting God to be God, like that would be hopeful. Or maybe they're thinking, oh, these gods we worship must really be gods. How deluded, like, where do you think these people are in their thinking? First of all, that they worship things that have never spoken to them already, never done anything for them. They're objects like the sun and the moon and crickets and whatever else. And yet they think that this is a good idea.
Well, and not even that, they're objects that they made themselves.
They made themselves. And we saw in Isaiah what God says about that, right? Places in the Bible where if you think God doesn't say things are stupid or foolish, read Isaiah. He said, made it sound pretty stupid, right? You are a fool if you do that. And this is what they're doing. So they think it's a good idea. Just one thing to kind of clarify the picture. So this situation he's asking them to do, just for anybody who might be watching who doesn't know, is this a typical thing? Like, what is it they're actually doing?
Preparing a sacrifice to God.
Yeah, so
Or to
this
their
is
gods.
normal thing that they do.
Yeah.
But he says, you do it. Normally they put them on fire and have a burnt offering. So this is a picture of a burnt offering. But he said, we're not going to put the fire to it this time. We're going to let the gods do the firing part themselves. And the people said, okay, great idea. That's a good idea. Again, you might want to put like a thing there and ask yourself, how do I feel? What do I think these people are thinking? Where are they? Are they so far gone, or do they want to just see who replies? Like, I don't know what to think about where they are. Initially, I just thought, well, they're so deluded. They actually think these false gods will do this, but maybe not. Maybe they just wanted to see the show because they were kind of those kinds of people as well. Any
Some
other
would
thoughts?
think that they believed their gods would do it. I mean, this wasn't something that they believed overnight. And Solomon left up Asherah poles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this was generations that things had become diluted as far as the Israelites following God's commandments
Yep.
and so like that.
For sure. Yeah, Evelyn.
Yeah, I heard a teaching the other day. It was talking about like the difference between delusion and deceit.
Uh-huh.
And that delusion actually comes from the Lord when one continues to sin.
Yeah.
You know, that he allows them to be that way, that they really don't know the difference, you know. And it sounds like there was a lot of influence from Jezebel and her husband, you know, with these other gods that they really, I mean, they should have been able to say right away, no, you know, the Lord is the one, you know, but they didn't, you know.
They didn't. They didn't say, oh, you don't have to test it. We know God will beat these other gods. We know that he will. That even that, I've kind of been hoping as I wrote this, I'm kind of hoping that in the crowd somewhere, there are some people going, oh, wait a minute, that maybe a few of them, at least their thoughts have been jiggled a little bit. And they're kind of like, oh, wait a minute. We know this story. We know this God, and I know what's going to happen. And maybe they started backing up, you know, I don't know. We don't see any sign of that, but I sure hope that there's some of those there that start to remember who God is. Any other thoughts before we read the next segment and see what happens when they do this? Okay, y'all keep moving. Sarah Sanchez, can you read 25 to 40 for us?
Okay, so Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose the one ox for yourselves and prepare it first, since there are many of you, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire under the ox. Then they took the ox which was given to them, and they prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice, no one answered. And they limped about the altar which they had made. And at noon, Elijah ridiculed them and said, call out with a loud voice, since he is God. Undoubtedly, he is attending to business, or he's on the way, or on a journey. Perhaps he is asleep and will awaken. So they cried out with a loud voice and cut themselves according to their custom, with swords and lances until blood gushed out of them. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. What am I reading? Phil? I'm sorry.
That's it. You got it. Oh, wait, no,
Okay.
no,
My
I
short.
guess we're gonna go to 40. Yeah,
Till 40. Okay.
Yeah.
Then Elijah said to the people, "Come forward to me." So all the people came forward to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Then Elijah took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of the tribes of the son of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Then he laid out the wood. He cut the ox into pieces, and he placed it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." And he said, "Do it a second time." So they did it a second time. Then he said, "Do it a third time." So they did it a third time. The water flowed around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. Then, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet approached and said, "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are the God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all the things at your word. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, Lord, are God, and that you have turned your heart back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Then Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there.
Woo. Yeah, I was like, I wanted to stop when we were doing 30, but I want to see this full picture first. So it was a good idea, right? That's where we ended our other segment. They thought, well, that's a good idea. So they set the stage, they prepare the ox the way they would for sacrifice, but they didn't burn it. Then what did the prophets of Baal do? Like, are they trying? What do they do?
Dancing around, they cut themselves, they're crying out.
Okay, from morning till noon, how did the picture look?
Their God is silent.
So before that, what do they do?
They called
They're
on.
crying out.
They just call on him. They call on the name of the Lord from morning till noon. They just kind of keep going. And then, yes, did their gods answer?
Nope.
No, they didn't. And it says they limped about the altar, so they're tired, I think. So at noon, what does Elijah do?
He
Mocking them.
calls them out on it.
He's mocking them. This is so interesting to me. He mocks them. How? What does he use in order to mock them? What do you see here? Anybody notice this?
Well, nowadays we'd say he's talking smack because he's ridiculing them. He's making fun of them.
He's making fun of them.
Yeah, he's like pretending that their gods are really gods. Wake them up. Maybe they're off doing this. Maybe they're just not. Maybe he's asleep.
Yeah.
So he's really making fun of. He's giving them, pointing out that they do not have the quality of God. They're not alive. They don't hear. They don't speak. They don't talk.
Thank you. The things that he lists there, look at each one. Let's take each one of them. Since he is a God, undoubtedly he is attending to business or is on the way or is on a journey. So does Elijah really think that that's what happens with God, that if he's away, he's too busy to hear you? No, he knows better. He knows his God would never be in that situation. So he takes the characteristics that we know of God and says, oh, maybe he's doing this. What's the next thing? Perhaps he is asleep and will awaken. Does God sleep?
No.
No.
No. So we have things we would say, does God know and hear you no matter where he is? Yeah, we call that omnipresence. But you know what? The word omnipresent is not in scripture. So how do we know he's omnipresent? Can you think, you may not know the address, but does anybody know of, or can you think of places you could go to find scriptures that will tell you that God is not going to be so far away from you that he can't hear you? Tell me a phrase about God that would indicate whether you know where to find it or not.
He's always with you.
Jesus said, I am always with you, even to the end of the age. Did God ever say that? I'm always with you? Yep. Guess what?
Yep.
I started getting references for these things. It's way too many. We can't even go there because we'll never get done. Which one could I pick? Anybody know some other things?
He will never leave you.
Yeah, he'll never
Never.
leave you or forsake you. Tracy?
Yeah, Jeremiah, he says, call to me and I will tell you unsearchable things that you do not know. So he tells
Great.
us to call to him.
Yeah, what's the address for that,
I think
Tracy?
it's Jeremiah 33:3.
Okay. Since she mentioned Jeremiah, let me give you another one. Jeremiah 23:24. Can a person hide himself in hiding places so that I do not see him, declares the Lord? Do I not fill the heavens and the earth, declares the Lord? How about Psalm 139? You can start at 7, but where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to heaven, you're there. If I go to Sheol, you're there. If I go to the dawn, you're there. Just keep reading Psalm 139. Let's see. Where's a good one? They're all good one. Yeah, I have 6 more just on one page. This is something you might want to look. Can I tell somebody? Could I show somebody that our God would never fall into any of these categories? And that's how he is mocking them, because he knows that they are not God. He already knows your God's not going to answer you, because if he was listening to you and was a real God, he would answer you if he was like our God. You can put down Acts 17:24-31 in case you guys want another New Testament one. This is one I've shared with you before. It lived on my refrigerator for a long time because it said God knows the habitations and the boundaries where he'll send us. And as military families, we moved all the time. So we just trusted him. But what's the part that says, he made man from every nation that they would seek God, if perhaps they might feel around for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist. Anyway, you can go on from there. That's just another one. How about the sleeping? Does God sleep?
No.
No. Can you find scripture for that? Yeah. Psalm 121:4-8. Behold, the protector of Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. This one's not about sleeping, but Psalm 34, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him.
What was the
How about
20?
go ahead,
What-
Mary, what?
What was the address of the one before it?
Psalm 121:4 and verse 8. It was 2
Thank you.
verses. And in Psalm 34, the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous. His
Yeah.
ears are toward their cry for help. Elijah's trying to give them reasons why their God may not be able to hear them. Can God hear you?
Yeah.
If you're one of his people, he will hear you. The scriptures, every place almost where you go where it says he hears his people, it also says he does not hear the cries of the wicked. But that's a whole nother thing. And the verse for what Jocelyn told us, Jesus saying, behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age. That's Matthew 28:20. So you can do your own, little study. How about 1 John 5:15? And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have what we have asked of him. Jesus says in the New Testament all the time, ask for what you want, knock, it'll be opened, ask and you shall receive, right? Good. Other thoughts on that, this mocking that he's doing?
This is the confidence that Elijah has. I
Yeah.
mean, he keeps upping the ante repeatedly.
Yeah.
And basically he's saying, bring it on, give it your best shot, because my God has no limits.
Right.
This speaks like so loud to me because there is zero doubt in him. This is how people do miracles. This is how people see miracles. He puts zero on his God. In fact, he's like, give me more. David was more, give me more. My God will win.
Yeah. Confidence because he knows the character of God, right? He knows it. He knows the Spirit speaking. He knows he's speaking with truth. All of those things you see indicated. Oh man, there's so many more good ones. Anyway, I'm going to bring up one more just because we've been there. 1 Peter 3:12. He's actually quoting Psalm 33:18. For the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears attend to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against evildoers, right? This is Peter quoting Psalm to tell him that God hears you. I love Daniel 10:12. Before you even finish praying, right? I'm just summarizing. Before you even finish praying, we were on our way to tell you that your prayer's been heard. When I studied that, I wrote that like, man, this is who I want to be, right? I want to be the kind of person that when I'm praying to God before I even finish, he's sending the answer and telling me your words were heard because of who you are, because of your character. Elijah's like that, right? Elijah's that kind of person, and he's living it out in confidence because he knows these things. So he tells them to, because of this, because he might not hear you, this is where the real ridiculing comes into place. He says, yell louder, because he probably can't hear you. So what do?
Cry it out with a louder voice.
They yell louder, and this is where somebody said they cut themselves everywhere as their custom. They dance, they cry out. The word is raving. You know, they rave. Where did we get the word rave? People raving like maniacs. They rave now until the time of the evening sacrifice. But what is the final sad word for them about their little g gods?
Doesn't answer.
There was no voice. No one answered.
And no one paid attention.
No one paid attention. The word tells us that our God is always paying attention. Who am I, Lord, that you would be mindful of me, right? Another psalm says that. Who am I that you would be mindful of me? But he is. He's mindful of us. He pays attention. What a blessing, right? What a blessing. To be able to know this is something we can remember when we're in these situations, that we have God who's hearing us and who's acting on our behalf. Okay, so the story continues. So they have no result. What does Elijah do next?
Gathers them around.
Yeah, he
And
says, come forward to me. So is Elijah yelling and dancing and screaming?
No.
No. Even as he speaks to them, he's just speaking to them. Then he instructs them. Well, he takes 12 stones, I'll give you that part, to represent the tribes of Israel. And then he says, he built an altar, and then he gives them instructions about the offering. So what are the things that he does? And then what does he do to make sure that they will know this is God if God answers?
This part gave me chills because this is not only showing God's power, but this is like disciplinary action towards God's people. So he's like rebuilding the altar that had been torn down.
Yep.
And the 12 stones, he's calling them out by their name. God named.
Good point.
God gave them their purpose. They've turned their backs on it. it just gives you chills. Like before he does the demonstration, God is reminding them, this is who you are. You know who I am, and you've turned your back on me.
Good.
It's wow.
Good. Yeah. So he prepares the ox the same way that they did, the same way that you would for an evening sacrifice. But what additional thing does he have them do?
There's water on it, lots and lots of water,
Lots and lots of water. In fact, they pour it on the offering how many times?
3 times.
3, so that it flows around the altar. And then he had them dig a trench around the altar. What does he do with the trench?
It fills it up with water too.
Fills it up with water. Why? Just in case anybody's going, oh, why do you do that? None of you would, but at home, in case anybody's
Because normally, if everything was all soaking wet and there's all this water, you wouldn't even be able to light the fire.
you couldn't light it, right? So he's making sure, he's again, in a way, can you see the ridicule in a way there as well? Like, you
Yeah.
couldn't even get a fire lit from your God, but I'm gonna soak mine. I'm gonna soak this. And by the way, one of the symbols for the gods of the Baals was a lightning bolt, right? So if
Oh.
anybody could light a fire, shouldn't it be able to be a god whose symbol is a lightning bolt, right? But nope, couldn't light a fire. So what does he do after he has that all set up?
He calls on the name of the Lord.
Yeah, in fact, normally we see the word calls for praise, but it just says he approached and said, right? This is meant to be, I think, the opposite of the picture of the Baals trying so hard, or the prophets to get Baal's attention. What does he say? What do you see in this prayer?
He calls him the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel.
Yeah,
And says, let it be known that you are the God in Israel. And that Elijah is his servant and has done all these things at God's word.
okay. So now we see him connecting that I've been saying and doing a lot of things, and they are all at God's word. Okay, good. So that everyone will know you're the God in Israel. And then he continues, what else does he want them to know? This people, remember, God's people, Israel, what will they know?
That he is the Lord, the God, and that he had not turned his back on them.
Now read that again.
Their heart back, and he has turned their heart back.
Their heart back to him. Does that
Right.
sound familiar? That you have turned their heart back? Anybody remember what it says in Malachi about Elijah, who's going to come before the second
Oh,
coming?
yeah. Turn the heart
Says
of the fathers
He's
to
going
the
to come to turn the heart of the people. It says it in Luke as well. This was one of the jobs of Elijah, was to turn the heart of the people back to God. And he puts it in this prayer so that they'll know that you have done that. I was just like, wow, there it is. It's right there. What a connection to Malachi and to the New Testament. So that they will know. So there's purpose here. There's purpose in what they're doing. That's all. That's his prayer. That's it. What happens next?
Everything was consumed, the wood, the stone. Wow.
Yep.
That licked up the water that was in.
In the trench.
Right. I've never seen a movie about this scene, but try to picture it, right? All these people standing around. There's a sacrifice on an altar. There's wood below it. Fire comes down. Fire fell. The fire fell from heaven and consumed the burnt offering, consumed the wood, consumed the stones and the dust, and then licked up the water. The fire licks up the water in the trench, and probably just like that, right? Wow. Imagine, like, I don't know, what would you do? I don't know what I would do. What would you do? Hopefully I'd be going, yes, God, I knew it would be you. I knew you could do it. But we don't know that any of them really thought that, but I'm still hoping somebody did, that somebody was just like waiting, like, I know this is going to end in this way. So
Well, it
what?
said they fell on their faces, but wouldn't you
Yeah.
think they'd move back?
Yeah, well,
No, I mean, I'd be moving back thinking,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I'm next.
they fell on their faces. And what did they say?
The right thing.
Yeah. Lord.
The God.
The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Were they supposed to already know that?
Yeah.
They were. supposed to know that. You'd think we could say, we could hope if we'd not read the rest of the Old Testament, if we'd not already been in Isaiah, Zechariah, and Malachi, we could say, oh, I'm sure that they've learned their lesson now. But this is pre-captivity, so we know differently. What happened to the prophets of the Baals?
Ooh, they were good.
Elijah told them to seize the
Seize
prophet.
them.
Honored them.
Seized
Well-
them and what?
Them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there.
Right, slaughtered them.
Slaughter.
They were killed. So think of this. The prophets of the Baals led the people to worship false gods. Does that happen today? Are there people not teaching people to follow the true God? True
Yes.
Jesus?
Yes.
Do you think there's going to be consequences based on this passage?
Yep.
Based on even the New Testament? Yes, we know God says. That's what we've been looking at in our last study about the last days, about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord will involve consequences for the people who lead other people astray. So do we ourselves then need to be careful that the word of the Lord in our mouths is truth?
Amen. Yes.
Amen. That's something we want to think about in a day where truth is being twisted and we get told to feel like, well, it's not nice to say the not truth. That's something we need to think about. We want to be found with truth in our mouths and then look why, look back to see why, what happens when people know that you spoke the word of truth. Okay, other thoughts before we see the end of this chapter? This is seriously so good. Like there's so much there.
I found it very interesting when he's in the process of adding the water and let me know if I misinterpreted this, but it seems like he has the people participating in pouring the water.
Somebody's doing it because he's having someone do it.
It's interesting because there is God's people. He's called them out, called name by the tribes that they're named Israel, and then they participate basically to give claim that no one else could have done it. They poured the water, only God.
Right.
And
There's this sort of leave no doubt moment, this point of the water. What interests me is what I'm kind of hoping is that it was the prophets themselves, because they would all be the people up at the altar. It could have been people, but likely it'd be priests or prophets who were doing it. So that would be interesting to me if it was the prophets of Baal, who he said, oh yeah, go ahead and soak the sacrifice. That's fine. Get it all wet. I don't know. I didn't look it up to see who they is, but that's a good point, Sarah. Okay, so just when you think you have just seen one of the coolest things ever, then you get the end of chapter 18, which for me, at the end, I literally wrote, whoa, remember my whoa paddle? This was a good whoa, not a bad whoa. So my woes from Revelation, this is a different kind of whoa. So let's see, where am I? Pat, can you read verses 41 to 44 for us?
And that's in 18, right?
Yeah.
44.
41 to 44.
Okay. The end of the drought. Elijah said to Ahab, get up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of a heavy rainfall. So Ahab got up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and he threw himself down on the ground and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, go up now and look toward the sea. And he went up and looked and said, there is nothing. And he said, go again 7 times. On the 7th time, he said, a small cloud as small as a man's hand is rising out of the sea. And he said, go up and say to Ahab, mount your chariot and get down so that the rain does not stop you. In the meantime, the sky turned black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel.
Okay, we keep seeing this power, this spirit and power of Elijah in these pictures. So I know we all want to jump to the end, but let's make sure we get there. So they've just had this test that, of course, God won. The prophets of Baal are now gone, and Elijah gives Ahab another instruction. What does he tell him to do this time? Go up toward the sea.
Eat and drink.
Just go eat and drink. Why?
There's a sound of the roar of a heavy shower. The rain
Okay,
is
right.
coming.
Yep, rain's coming. So sort of this idea of you can go ahead and eat and drink. Rain is coming. And what did Elijah do? First of all, does Ahab do what Elijah told him to do?
Yeah.
Yes. So again, he does. Then what does Elijah do?
He goes to the top of Mount Carmel and I don't know if he's praying because it doesn't really say that, but he's waiting now for the rain to come.
Yeah, it's kind of the picture of prayer. I know, I kind of looked, I thought that too. It's definitely the picture. He keeps sending this servant to go look at the sea. How many times did it take of looking before they had evidence?
7.
7. So again, there's another P word that we could say maybe Elijah has. What does he have while he's doing this waiting?
Patience.
Patience. He doesn't give up. He just keeps doing. We already talked about perseverance, but also patience. And then what does the servant see on that 7th time?
A tiny little cloud.
Yes, tiny cloud. And just based on that, what does Elijah send the servant to tell Ahab?
You better get going because the rains are coming. Heavy shower.
Okay. So how does Ahab travel? This is important. You don't want to miss it.
On a chariot.
On a chariot and horses, right? So Ahab is going to Jezreel. I had maps, but I don't want to take time to bring them up because I'm already keeping you a hair late. But the distance between Mount Carmel and Jezreel is about 50 kilometers, which is about 31 miles.
Oh my goodness.
So Ahab takes off in a chariot and horses. Is the rain really coming? Do we see the evidence of that?
Yes.
Yes, we're told in 45, the sky is dark, the wind comes up, and there's a heavy shower. Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. So again, did he do what Elijah said?
Yes.
Yes. How, you might want to list how many instructions did Elijah give Ahab, and he followed every single one. So truth of the word of the Lord, right? What then happened to Elijah?
Oh, it's amazing.
He won the
It is.
marathon.
Yeah, he did. How did he do that? What happened?
He belted his cloak around his waist and he outran Ahab to Jezreel.
How did he do it?
The hand of the Lord was on him.
Yes.
The hand of the Lord grabbed him by those girded loins and drug him along. Wow. What do you guys think when you read that? I mean, it is just awesome. You just think you've seen God do the coolest things ever. And then he does another one. What do you think of this scene?
I can imagine the look on Ahab's face when he got there and Elijah had got there before and be like, what?
Yeah.
He had to respect him in a way. He had to. I don't think
Yeah.
he wanted anybody else to know it, but I think he respected him.
Well,
That's pretty
everybody
good
does know because every time Elijah told him to do something, he did it. If a king is
Yeah.
obeying someone, I think whether he would want to or not, he indicated
Right.
that he did need to follow what he said for some reason, either respect or knowing it was God. What else do you guys think about this scene? Does it make you think about anything?
I'm gonna be honest, I was thinking, how old was Elijah when that happened? Because
Oh,
if he was like up there in age, then that would really be impressive.
I don't know. I have a feeling he's probably not very old, but I don't know for sure.
This is like he outran horses that left before him.
Yes, yes.
Or
So
good
this,
horses, because the
yes,
king
yes,
always
the
had the
king's
best.
horses, that's right. Not just any horses, that's a good point. This is probably almost instantaneous, right? I have so many pictures in my mind. Again, thinking of what happens to Elijah, you know, eventually. Thinking about the picture of when it talks about what we'll be like when we see the Lord. We'll have the same characteristics that he does, which includes walking through walls and just appearing at places, right? And the fact of, does God move his people sometimes along in the spirit? Does he take them places? To me, here's another foreshadowing and point of possibility of a real person that God took along in a way that people would not expect. I wanted, just before we close, and we'll do a good review on this so you can have your thoughts again, especially for those of you who didn't kind of study this before we did it tonight. We'll talk about it when we meet next week. But I want to think about when you see, and it depends on your version. So mine says he belted his cloak. Did some of you have the phrase gird? What do you have? Some of you have in front of you.
Girded
Girded his, what does it say?
Coins.
his loins.
His loins, girded his loins. Again, is that familiar to us? Have we studied somebody who talked to us about that picture? I'd like everybody to turn to 1 Peter 1:13. This is just awesome. Let me give everybody a minute to get there. 1 Peter 1:13. Okay, somebody want to read it for us?
Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed.
Does anybody have something besides prepare your minds? We could look it up in the concordance because we have before, but there's a version that will just tell you what this means. Deanna?
Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind. Is
Yes.
one.
Yes. So in Peter, he says, prepare your minds for action is the picture. In fact, it means gird up the loins of your mind. Remember, that word was only used in the New Testament in 1 Peter 1:13. Only place it's used, and it means to brace up. The picture in that word is of someone tightening up their belt to hold their tunic up out of the way so that they can get somewhere they need to arrive without delay. Peter is telling us to be like Elijah, to be ready for action, to be ready to go, to be ready to move, to be moved by the hand of God. Be ready because he's going to move you. Does that put a different spin on that even than when we talked about it in 1 Peter? Oh, to me, it's so exciting. You know, this is why we want to take what we can from Elijah. We need to be ready. In Luke, somewhere, it says, be dressed for service. It's a cross-reference to these. Do I have it? I don't know if I have it. I did have it.
I have it. It's
Yeah.
Luke 12:35. Be dressed for service and keep your lamps burning.
Yes, and then we get our references to the 10 virgins as well. Be ready, be dressed for service. And then now when you see those verses, have Elijah pictured in your mind, because that's exactly what the word means. You've got to have your clothes dressed and ready to go without tripping over your skirts so that you can move fast because God's going to take you somewhere. What an amazing picture. So if you were going to add some things that we've learned about the spirit and power of Elijah, we talked last time about things like faith, obedience, prayer, giving the power of life, truth. We talked about those kinds of things. Are there things that you would add from this lesson? What do you think you would add to what we would learn about the spirit and power of Elijah?
My personal application is that Elijah, he was not a man of perfect faith, but he was a man of great faith. So we don't have to be perfect, but God asks us not to put limits on him. So I think about all the times, like if God told me to, strap yourself up, Sarah, I'm going to take you. I'd be the Sarah of the Bible. I'd be laughing. Come on, you're going to do that with this old lady, like this type of thing. And I think God's going to call us out every time that we do that, because he's telling us, you're only preventing miracles from happening. Look at my servant, not give me limits. Look at my servants. They didn't understand, but they just did what I asked. And when they did what I asked, they saw amazing things. You're denying yourself miracles. You're denying yourself for me to be able to work fully in your life. So
Okay, good. Yeah. So I hear Sarah saying, don't put limits on God, and that miracles will happen. That part of the spirit and power of Elijah was that miracles happened when he spoke the word of the Lord. What else are you guys thinking? What kinds of things did he have to know or feel or believe to do what he did in this chapter?
We have to believe that he is God, that he is the only God, and he's the only one that has the power. We can't be swayed by a lot of the false teaching, a lot of the things that look good, that look
Okay.
like they're powerful, but
Good.
yeah.
No, right? No, he is God. One of the things he
No.
asked for God to prove, and he knew it. We know he knew it by the mocking that he did to the prophets of the Baals by saying, yeah, maybe this. He knows his God. He knows God. He knows God has the power. Good. Confidence in that. Anything else you guys see from him?
I think God always has a plan. You may
Mhm.
not get every piece of it at first, but as you go along in obedience, he will give you the next thing to do.
Okay, in that obedience, he believed God had a plan, right? He knew God had shown him that step by step in chapter 17. He knew he had a plan. What about that persuasiveness we talked about? Where did he get that? We know now. Where did he get that ability to persuade people to do what he told them to do?
God.
From God, the Holy Spirit, the word, right? That was on him. If he wasn't speaking truth every time he stood before God, would he have that ability?
No.
Would God
No.
continue to use that? No.
No.
That's another important thing about speaking truth. If you want to be used by God, if the Holy Spirit's going to speak through you, it has to be truth that we're speaking. Did Elijah keep any credit for himself?
No.
No. In that prayer, he said that I do this through your word. Show them that you're God. And in fact, proved also there was no power in any other gods. So he didn't keep that glory. We said he had patience. He was patient as he waited for God to act. When he told Ahab, go and eat because a shower is coming, had he seen the evidence of a shower yet?
No.
So we know he believed he was going to bring that rain because God told him he was going to. That's all. God said he would. And God had just proven himself in a big way, right? He licked up the water as the fire. How about prepared for action, right? Do we have to be ready?
Yeah.
And if anything will make you think, I want to be ready now, hopefully it's the picture of what God did with Elijah. He will, when you are serving him, he's going to give you supernatural ability to get the things done for him that he asks you to do. There's no other way to do it, right? Other than in his power. How many of you have tried to do ministry all in your own power? Or forgotten partway through and like, oh, what? Wait a minute, I'm trying to do all this myself. What's harder? Sometimes when we get weary and doing good, it's a good time to stop and ask, Who's doing this work, me or God? Sometimes it's just battling the enemy, but sometimes we might be in the wrong spot. What I thought was an awesome picture in the end was that word that how long will you stagger between? How long will you limp between two opinions? We can either go limping around wondering who's God, or we can outrun chariots, right? Those are your choices. You can stagger trying to follow the right God, or you can let him outrun chariots. Is that not an awesome picture? That's what we want that. We don't want to limp. We don't want to stagger between two opinions. We don't want to stumble. Other thoughts?
I think based on kind of to bring it home, what we were talking about last week, like how this keeps repeating all the P's about God, about, you know, and that just that those who seek him, he will provide. Those who are close to his commandments, he will provide. We don't necessarily know how that's going to happen. Like Elijah never knew how that was going to happen.
Yeah.
So that dependence on God, knowing that he's in control, knowing that he is all powerful, knowing he'll provide.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, good. I mean, I don't know what he knew for sure about what was going to happen with the sacrifices. I know I'm sure he knew God was going to come down and consume the fire, but I'm guessing he had no idea he was going to outrun Ahab. You know, that'd be the picture of, that's why you have to be ready, because God's just going to grab you and take you and go. So true. He just trusted God. He just knew. What a picture of that kind of faith, confidence, obedience, trust, all of that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, there are two characters here, Obadiah and Elijah.
Yes.
And yeah, Obadiah did not have faith there. When he saw Elijah, you know, he immediately went to, oh my goodness, I'm going to get killed, because, you know,
yes,
he didn't have that faith, that solid faith that Elijah had. Oh, here you are, Elijah.
Yeah, come on. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go. You know, he could have had a totally different reaction.
Such a great point. Yeah. Such a great point. That fear, like, it reminds me again of the verse I'm keeping close this year, the Isaiah verse of, do not panic, do not be faint, do not fear, don't be calm, and do not panic, and don't be afraid, and don't be faint-hearted, right? That's a perfect picture. That's how he reacted. He reacted in a panic moment of, no, if you make me do this, he's going to kill me. Good point. Other thoughts?
I just wondered myself, and I thought about even me, and when was I at the point where I said, now I know that you are God, and now I know that you love me enough, you know, that you chose me.
Yeah.
You know, and that takes a lot, because I was at a place one time in my life that I didn't love myself, so I really didn't think anybody else did either.
Yeah.
So for me to get to that point and be able to walk down that aisle and give my life to Christ, it was almost like I was like the widow. Now I know.
Yeah.
It was almost like all the people that were at the, you know, the altars. Now we know.
Now we know.
You know, because God showed himself to be true. And I think the Spirit works in you and draws you. You know, the Spirit of God draws you, because God, you know, even the part that, like, I love the song, said he thought I was to die for.
Yeah.
So he gave his life for me, and I'm just so glad about that. Nobody knows. I was like 50 years old before I was even baptized. So it just took a while.
Amen.
It took my son going through crack cocaine for me to get to that point. And he even told me, Mom, I believe God is using what I'm going through to get to you. And I believe that God was doing that. You know, he worked it out for the good. So yeah. When was the time when you said, now I know that you're
good.
God?
Yep. When was that? It's a good question for all of us. Anybody else? I know you might need a week to kind of stew on it, meditate on it, let it kind of, you know, stir around in there as we come back together. And again, we'll kind of revisit this idea of these thoughts, because yeah, it takes a long time sometimes. I've been looking at these in depth for a while. So yeah, so everybody at home and you guys that are still on, it will be chapter 19 next week. We'll just continue to watch what happens with Elijah. Okay, see you then.